A nerf in gaming is generally defined as a change made to a game mechanic to intentionally make it weaker for the sake of game balance. In Pokemon, nerfs are very common and they typically happen between generations. For example, weather conditions set by abilities were changed in Generation 6 to only last 5 turns instead of the whole battle. Mega Kangaskhan's Parental Bond ability was changed in Generation 7 so that the second hit only deals 25% damage instead of 50% damage. And Grassy Glide's base power was nerfed in Generation 9 from 70 to 55, just to name a few. These nerfs and all other nerfs made were because Game Freak felt that a Pokemon or group of Pokemon became stronger than they had originally anticipated. Thus, nerfs had to be put in place to balance out the competitive scene after certain Pokemon were previously able to take advantage of a certain mechanic. However, in this video, I will instead be talking about proactive nerfs, what I am loosely defining as a mechanic change made at the same time that new content is released in an attempt to preemptively balance out the power of that new content. In Pokemon, this most commonly looks like a new Pokemon being released in the same generation that a mechanic was changed that affects that newly released Pokemon. These Pokemon never had access to a certain mechanic, and if they had been introduced before a certain mechanic was changed, they likely would have been even stronger. Some of these changes are pretty clearly meant to nerf a specific Pokemon or group of Pokemon, and some are changes that were not really targeted towards a specific Pokemon, but still affect them regardless, so I definitely feel that they are worth discussing. I will be discussing the implications that these nerfs had in both singles and doubles competitive contexts, but keep in mind that I do not play singles at all, so I ask that you respectfully correct me in the comments if I say anything wrong or inaccurate. With all that being said, let's look at proactive nerfs in competitive Pokemon. First, we have Zoroark being released in Generation 5, the same generation that the team preview was introduced in PvP battles. Zoroark and Zorua are unique in that they have a signature ability, Illusion. This ability makes it so that when the user is sent in battle, it takes the appearance of the last non-fainted, non-egg Pokemon in the player's party. By taking the appearance, this means that to the opponent, the Zoroark will completely appear to be a different Pokemon, including its name. This does not change anything else about Zoroark though, so it keeps its own stats, typing, ability, moves, and held item. Once the user is hit with a damaging move, the illusion will then wear off, and Zoroark will go back to being Zoroark. The team preview is exactly what it sounds like. You get to preview what Pokemon your opponent has on their team. Before Generation 5, there was no team preview in PvP battles, so if you wanted to battle someone online or through an offline link battle, you did not know what Pokemon they brought with them. This really allowed for the element of surprise, especially in 6v6 single battles. Now that we have team previews in PvP battling, the element of surprise for what Pokemon you brought is now gone, but this affects both players equally, which I think was ultimately a good decision. Now if any Pokemon was to abuse the lack of a team preview in PvP battles, it would be Zoroark. Imagine you don't know what 6 Pokemon your opponent brought with them to battle, and with Zoroark in the game, you wouldn't even know if one of your opponent's Pokemon was actually that Pokemon or if it was a Zoroark until you attack it. It's tough to tell how Zoroark would have functioned if it had been introduced before the team preview was implemented, or if the team preview was never implemented at all, but considering the fact that Zoroark was already pretty good in Gen 5 singles, being in the UU tier, I think it would have seen even more use in a format without the team preview, maybe even pushing it to Ubers. I'm not a singles player though, so if there are any singles players who know more about this, please let me know in the comments. Next, we have Aegislash being released in Generation 6, the same generation that the Steel type was made to no longer resist Dark and Ghost. Aegislash and its evolutionary line were the first Steel Ghost type Pokemon in the game, which is a very strong typing, and combined with Aegislash's stats and stance change ability that lets it go from insane defense to insane offense with a click of a move, it was one of the strongest Pokemon released in X and Y. It would have been even stronger if it had not been for the Steel type being nerfed to no longer resist Dark and Ghost. Had Aegislash been introduced before Gen 6, it would have had 3 immunities, 8 resistances, and only 2 weaknesses to fire and ground. This would have been one of the best, if not the best dual typing in the entire game. Due to the nerf though, this typing now has 4 weaknesses instead of 2, but was given an additional resistance since the Fairy type was also added in the same generation. Thus, this wasn't a complete nerf, because defensively, Steel lost 2 resistances, but then gained 1 resistance, and offensively, Ghost now hits 2 additional types for neutral, Steel and Fairy, and Steel hits an additional type for super effective, Fairy. I still think that overall though, Aegislash would have been stronger if the Steel type wasn't nerfed and the Fairy type wasn't added. The Fairy type was mostly made to balance out the overabundance of Dragon types in the competitive scene, since the only real counter to Dragon types was Steel types. Thus, Steel types would have still been the main counter to Dragon types, whereas now, the main counter to Dragon types are Fairy types. Now if the Steel type wasn't nerfed, and the Fairy type was added, then this typing would obviously be busted. But I'm very curious to hear what you think of which Aegislash would have been stronger. The one we would have gotten if Aegislash was introduced a generation earlier that has 2 fewer weaknesses, but also 1 fewer resistance because the Fairy type wasn't added yet, or the one we actually got that came after the nerf of the Steel type, giving it 2 additional weaknesses, but also an additional resistance from the Fairy type, and has better offense since it can hit Fairy types for super effective. Next, we have Chandelure's hidden ability being changed from Shadow Tag in Generation 5 to Infiltrator in Generation 6. Hidden abilities were introduced in Generation 5, and the main way of getting them at the time was through the Dream World. The Dream World was a browser-based online game that was an extension to the Generation 5 games. It was made accessible by connecting one's Black and White or Black and White 2 game via the Pokémon Global Link website. It featured minigames, a customizable house, a garden to plant berries, and an island to catch Pokémon. The Pokémon caught in the Dream World would always have their hidden ability, so as long as they were available to catch in the Dream World, they could have their hidden ability in-game. According to the code of the Generation 5 games, the Chandelure evolutionary line all had Shadow Tag as their hidden ability, but since they were never made available to catch in the Dream World, their hidden ability was never made obtainable legitimately. It then got permanently changed to Infiltrator in Generation 6, where it was made available legitimately, meaning that Chandelure never actually had access to Shadow Tag. Considering the fact that Chandelure gets access to Minimize to raise its evasiveness, Fire Spin and Will-O-Wisp for residual damage, Stab with Flamethrower, Heat Wave, Overheat, Fire Blast, Shadow Ball, and Hex, coverage moves with Energy Ball and Psychic, and a base 145 special attack stat to work with, I think it was a pretty good call to not give Chandelure access to Shadow Tag. Next, we have Rillaboom being released in Generation 8, the same generation that terrains were nerfed. In Generation 6 and 7, Electric, Grassy, and Psychic terrain granted a 50% boost to Electric, Grass, and Psychic moves respectively. This was nerfed in Generation 8 so that these types only received a 30% boost from terrain. This was obviously because of the 4 guardian deities, Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, and Tapu Fini, which were some of the most consistently dominant Pokemon in singles and doubles formats throughout the entirety of Generation 7. In VGC, Tapu Bulu was definitely the worst, but they were all still very strong. Rillaboom is a Pokemon that also has access to setting terrain with Grassy Surge, and it was and continues to be very good in the competitive scene, so good that it may as well be the 4th Guardian Deity over Tapu Bulu. Rillaboom was absolutely not the reason for the nerf to terrains, but if any Pokemon were to take advantage of the terrain boost being 50% instead of 30%, it would be Rillaboom. What really sets Rillaboom apart from Tapu Bulu is its typing and move pool. With a similar looking stat spread, they both generally function as bulky physical attackers. While Tapu Bulu does have an additional type, this does not make it better. Tapu Bulu does not learn a single physical attacking fairy move, so if it wanted Fairy Stab at all, it would have to use Dazzling Gleam, a special move. While being part fairy does give Tapu Bulu some additional resistances and an immunity, it also gives it a 4 times weakness to poison. So if you're not using your secondary typing at all offensively, and it doesn't pair well with your primary type defensively, you'd really rather not have that additional type at all. Rillaboom also gets access to Grassy Glide, a 70 base power move that hits with increased priority on grassy terrain, something that Tapu Bulu lacks. The mechanic change that Rillaboom was responsible for was the nerf to Grassy Glide, like I mentioned in the intro, as it was changed to only be 55 base power. If Rillaboom had been introduced in Generation 7, or if terrains were never nerfed, it would have been even stronger than it already is. Next, we have Smeargle's signature move Sketch never being able to copy Revival Blessing. Revival Blessing is a normal type status move that revives a fainted member in the user's party, restoring them to 50% HP. Smeargle is unique in that it only learns one move, Sketch. However, This one move can permanently copy any move in the game, and Smeargle can relearn Sketch as many times as you want, meaning that Smeargle can learn every move in the game with some exceptions. Unfortunately, Revival Blessing was made to be one of those exceptions. This is really the only nerf on this list that I honestly don't feel needed to be done. Revival Blessing has barely seen any use in any format, and that's partly due to the fact that Palmon and Rabsca, the two Pokemon that get this move, are just really underwhelming. In Gen 9 singles, Palmon ranks in the PU tier, and Rabsca ranks in the ZU tier. Smeargle isn't doing too hot in singles either, where it hangs out with Rabsca in the ZU tier. In doubles, Palmon and Rabsca still don't see much usage, even in low power level formats like Reg A and Reg H. Smeargle actually does see pretty decent usage, particularly in high power level formats like Reg G. Smeargle usually holds the Focus Sash for increased survivability, and uses the moves Spore, Follow Me, and Fake Out, and whatever fourth move the team needs. Decorate is good to increase damage from an ally, Trick Room and Tailwind are good for speed control, and Wide Guard is good to protect against spread moves, something that is very common in formats like Reg G. Now, does it seem like Smeargle has room for Revival Blessing? Even if it did, Revival Blessing only has 1 PP, and one of the only ways to restore PP is with the use of the Lepa Berry held item. Sure, Smeargle could recycle the Lepa Berry, but this is wasting another move slot, and you're really going to want all 3 moves of Spore, Follow Me, and Fake Out. Additionally, if Smeargle is holding the Lepa Berry, it can't hold the Focus Sash, an item that is essential for it to stay alive with its horrendous defenses. So I really don't think Smeargle would have been broken if it was able to sketch Revival Blessing, but let me know what you think. Next, we have the 4 Treasures of Ruin all having their base stats nerfed before ever being playable online. In version 1.0.0, the initial release of Scarlet and Violet, the 4 Treasures of Ruin all had a base stat total of 580 distributed like this. Originally, Chen Pao had base 130 attack, Chi Yu had base 145 special attack, Ting Lu had base 165 HP and 130 defense, and Wo Qian had base 90 attack and 100 special attack. All of these stats were nerfed down to a base stat total of 570 in the next version of Scarlet and Violet, version 1.0.1, and this update was required in order to battle online. Chen Pao's attack was reduced to 120, Chi Yu's special attack was reduced to 135, Ting Lu's HP was reduced to 155, and its defense was reduced to 125, while its special attack, a stat that it will not use at all since it's a physical attacker, was increased to 55, and Wo Qian's attack was reduced to 85, and its special attack was reduced to 95. Thus, the 3 Treasures of Ruin and Wo Qian never had access to their original base stats for competitive play, since they were nerfed in the required update for online connectivity. Considering how good the 3 Treasures of Ruin were at one point or another in the competitive scene, particularly Chi Yu and Chen Pao, I think it was definitely a good call to nerf their stats. Surprisingly, this was probably the least egregious issue in the unplayable game that was the initial release of Scarlet and Violet. Lastly, we have Kingambit never getting access to Knockoff. Kingambit was introduced in Generation 9 as an evolution to Bisharp, a Pokemon that was introduced in Generation 5 that could learn Knockoff via Move Tutor in Gens 5, 6, and 7. Even though Knockoff wasn't a teachable move in Gen 8, as long as a Pokemon could learn the move in a previous game, they could be transferred into a new game knowing that move, so Bisharp was still able to learn Knockoff in Sword and Shield. In Scarlet and Violet though, moves exclusive to previous generations will no longer be kept when transferred. Knockoff was brought back as a teachable move, as it is TM 181, but neither Bisharp nor Kingambit can learn the move. This one I think could have gone either way, because Roaring Moon, another Dark-type Pokemon introduced in Generation 9 with an even higher attack stat than Kingambit, does get access to Knockoff, and it's definitely good, but it's not insanely broken or anything. I did find when making this video that Kingambit has access to Knockoff in Gen 9 National Dex, an unofficial fan-made format on Pokemon Showdown that allows all moves, items, abilities, and battle gimmicks from previous generations into one format. Since Bisharp was able to learn Knockoff before, Kingambit is allowed to use it in this tier, along with Pursuit, a Dark-type move that was removed in Sword and Shield. Before the Terra ban, Kingambit was banned in National Dex, so maybe Knockoff Kingambit was too strong. Roaring Moon is also banned in National Dex before and after the Terra ban, so I really don't know what to make of this. Again, help from some singles players in the comments would be great. And those are proactive nerfs in competitive Pokemon. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with any of my reasonings, or feel that I missed any. I was also thinking about making a video on proactive buffs, but I couldn't really think of any good ones, so please let me know in the comments what entries I could include. Anyway, if you want to support me and my channel, the best way to do so is just by leaving a nice comment. I do genuinely read all comments, and will try my best to respond to as many as I can. You can also click the join button and become a member, and I made the cost as low as possible at 99 cents USD. Members get a badge next to their name and early video access, but other than that, I really don't have any other perks for members. Keep in mind that these videos will be releasing on my normal schedule for non-members, so don't feel obligated at all to join unless you really want to support me and you are financially capable of doing so. Huge thanks to all my members. I really appreciate your continued support for the channel. Likes are also one of the ways in which YouTube determines if a video should be passed around to more people, so if you feel this video deserves it, I would appreciate it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.